Hey YouTubers, welcome back to DonnyBoy73 and welcome back to another episode of Small Engines Questions and Answers for Friday, October 14th, 2011. First of all, I want to thank all the YouTubers who send me well wishes for my wife. She is out of the hospital and doing a bit better, even though it's an illness that we have to deal with all the time. And if you're wondering what's going on here, I'm in the process of getting a new stove installed. I've got the hole in the ceiling. And I have to install this ceiling adapter kit over here and then get it wet inspected. So it's a bit of work, it does make a mess, but once it's installed I'll be happy. And after that I'll be getting rid of this old stove over here. And this stove over here is certified and it's airtight, so hopefully it's going to be better all around. Also I want to show you this Homelite XL1, it's like the Homelite Super Mini, and this one here is in like mint condition, it's unbelievable. It's got good compression. I've got to check it over still. I don't even know if it runs, but the bar and chain are like new on it. It actually belongs to a friend of mine, so we're just going to be selling it after, I guess. Not sure what it's worth, but if it runs it's going to be worth a little bit more. Probably the most it would need is a carb kit or something like that. So that's another tip. If you come across an old saw and it hasn't run for a while, the first thing you want to check is for spark. And then if it doesn't run after that, you may want to check the carb kit. If the saw isn't too used like this one, that's probably all you need. If the saw has a lot of wear on it, sometimes the crank bearings wear out and the crank seals need to be replaced as well. And the symptoms of that is that you're never going to be able to adjust it properly. You're going to adjust the carb, it's going to run good for a few minutes, but after that you're going to have to readjust it and keep doing that. That's a symptom of a leaking crank seal. A YouTuber had asked me to start up the Homelite 330 that you see in the box here. It's all in parts. It was all together on the bench in one of my other videos. What's happened to this one is that one of the crank bearings is shot on the clutch side and the crank seal is shot, and I was getting the same symptoms I just mentioned to you where I have to adjust the carburetor every 5 minutes. It's really annoying and it just doesn't want to keep running properly. So it's in this box here for parts. It's got good compression, good spark. I just don't have time to hunt down crank bearings and crank seals. Maybe it's a project for the future, I don't know. The next step I'm going to show you today is what not to do when you want to remove the fuel from your snowblower. This snowblower here has a hole right in the bottom of the tank here, and I assume that they did that to remove the fuel out of the gas tank. Well, there's an easier way to do that. You can just pull the fuel line underneath the gas tank right from over here and your fuel is just going to come out. And you can also use a turkey baster like this to remove the fuel. It does work good. Just don't use it to baste your turkey after. So now to properly fix this, I'm just going to have to replace the fuel tank. So anyways, I don't know why they did that, but I just thought I'd show you that. In my next question, a YouTuber took apart his Stihl MS-180C chainsaw. It had spark before he took it apart, and now that it's back together, there's no spark. So he's wondering what went wrong. What sometimes happens when people take these apart and put them back together and they have no spark, it's all due to the switch components. And they're all over here, and you have to make sure that all the parts are back together exactly like this, because you may not have spark if some of the parts touch together. For example, as soon as the metal part here contacts the other metal part over here, you will have no spark. So this is the off position, this is the on position. You want to make sure again that these parts are properly installed. And you want to make sure that the wires are installed in this configuration over here. This black wire here goes to the switch right here, and there's the wire right there. You want to make sure it's not touching any metal parts. Now if you took off the ignition module or coil during this assembly, you want to make sure that when you put it back together, that the gap between the flywheel and the coil is about the thickness of a business card. So place your business card between the coil and the flywheel and then tighten up the bolts that hold it on. If the gap between the ignition module and the flywheel is too wide, you're not going to have any spark. And if the gap between the ignition module and the flywheel is too small, for example, if it's rubbing on the flywheel, you're not going to have any spark either. So these are tips for when you take apart your Stihl MS-180C chainsaw. This will also apply to the 017, 018, and the MS-170. In my next question, a YouTuber is wondering about the fuel lines on a Poulan chainsaw. Specifically, he's wondering, does the filter attach to the small fuel line or to the big fuel line? Here's the saw I'm talking about. Well, the small fuel line attaches to the connector on top of the carb right here, and it goes right in the fuel tank over on this side over here. And there you can see it at the end of my screwdriver right here. It goes right in the fuel tank, and the filter attaches to the small fuel line. Now the bigger fuel line I'm talking about starts from the primer right here, and it goes right in the fuel tank, and when it's in the fuel tank, you only need to put it down approximately 1 inch. You don't need to push the line all the way down to the bottom of the tank. Then you're going to have a third line over here, and it goes to the primer as well. And the last line I showed you connects on the right hand side of the primer, as you can see right down there. So again, remember that the small fuel line that connects on the top connector of the carburetor goes in the fuel tank, and that's where the filter attaches to. Another question I get sometimes is people ask me, how tight should I put these shear bolts on my snowblower? Well, actually you should not fully tighten them up. There should always be a bit of play in them like this, maybe like 1/8 of an inch or something like that. You should be able to move the shear bolt like this. The reason for having them a little loose like that is so that the pressure isn't all on the shaft. If the bolt is fully tightened up and you cannot move it at all and it's so tight, then when you hit something, the bolt may not break and you may end up damaging the gearbox. So that's why you always leave a little play in your shear bolts. So that'll be it for this week's Small Engines Questions and Answers. I also want to welcome all the new subscribers to my channel. I want to thank those who regularly watch and support me. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.